So we have people from 20 different countries of origin. So this is the cover. The book weighs 5 pounds. The people we interviewed were so lively, interested in the world. And there were some Holocaust survivors. There were lots of people who left Cuba because of Castro, people who left South America. One of the things that really struck us was how important family is, the idea of freedom. It took us about 2.5 years to finish all the interviews. We created this exhibition, which is all the pictures of all 90 people. They have their story. So their legacy, their words of wisdom are going to be passed down to this and future generations.
Hello, and a warm welcome to the Journey Journals. My name is Gaia from Life of Gaia, and in today's episode entitled The Wisdom of the Century, I am joined by Merle Saferstein, who is an author and legacy educator, to discuss an inspiring new project of hers, which is a book that captures the life stories and wisdom of 90 nonagenarians and centenarians here in Florida. Now, as many of you know, this channel was inspired by the Joseph Campbell quote that the cave you fear to enter holds the jewels that you seek. And many of these remarkable elders who Merle has interviewed have experienced incredible hardships in the face of surviving wars, economic upheavals, or social change. And through her book, they share with us some powerful life lessons around love, resilience, and community. I'm delighted to have you join us here today. A very warm welcome to you, Merle.
Thank you, Guy. I'm thrilled to be here. This is a great opportunity to share some of the wonderful experiences that I've had through this project.
Thank you, Merle. If you could get us started off with telling us a little bit about yourself and just introducing yourself to our audience.
Sure. I am an educator by profession. I started in elementary school, teaching third grade, and for many years taught in different situations. I eventually became the director of outreach at a Holocaust center in South Florida and did that for 26 years. And it was really my great privilege to work with Holocaust survivors, approximately 500, and to learn from them some of life's most important lessons. When I retired from the Holocaust Center, I knew that I wasn't really finished um, with working, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I eventually developed a course called Living and Leaving Your Legacy and have taught and spoken about legacy ever since then. And so this project just kind of feels as a natural path to the next step in my journey.
Merle, could you tell us a little bit about what is the wisdom of the century and what inspired you to document these stories of nonagenarians and centenarians?
Certainly. So what ended up happening was when I was at the Holocaust Center, I we had student programs, student prejudice programs, where we had survivors, a facilitator, and 10 students at every table. And we talked to them about the dangers of prejudice. There was a woman, her name was Sandra Koifman, who was one of the facilitators. So through the years of my work at the Holocaust Center, Sandra often volunteered at these programs. After I retired, Sandra had heard that I was doing some legacy work and called me and asked me to come and do a session on ethical will writing with some of her friends. So I did that. And then, I don't know, maybe a year or two later, I got a call from her. So this was January of 2021. And Sandra said, I have this idea. I'd love to write a book. I'd like to interview people, 100 people, 100 and over. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I said, I don't think that we're going to be able to find 100 people who are over 100, who are with it enough to really be able to share their stories and their wisdom. And so I said, how about 90 people over 90? And so that's how that got started. So we talked about it, and Sandra's vision was to not only tell their stories and learn some of the wisdom that they have to share, but also to do photographs of each person. So Sandra asked someone to come on the team as a graphic designer. This woman eventually left and was replaced by Jenny Menzel, who was the graphic designer for my books. And the first graphic designer brought Pipe Yanguis, who is a photobiographer. And so we began as a team. We started interviewing people much later in the year. But first we had to do all the legal pieces and get all the information together, find the people to interview. Sandra asked me to come up with the questions, which I did. And we then began interviewing. It took us about a little over, I'd say 2.5 years to finish all the interviews. Sandra did all the interviews of Spanish speaking people, and also some of the other English speakers, but together we did all the interviews. And Pipe came to every single interview. So he was the lucky one who got to meet all 90 people. He photographed them. He's a fabulous photographer, and each person we gave a portrait after we interviewed them so that they could have one of the portraits.
It sounds like an absolutely amazing process. Would you mind sharing just a little bit about how the interview selection process worked and how you ended up deciding on the interviewees?
Yes, but before I do that, I'm just going to tell you a story that I just heard the other day that Sandra heard. Sandra was with someone whose father was in the book. And this woman said, I've got to tell you what my father said. He said, of all the people in the world, I was one of 90 people who got chosen to be in this book. And I just thought that was so delightful. So basically, how we started was just word of mouth. We put it out there that we were doing this project, and Sandra's had many friends who had parents or knew of people, as did I. And so initially, we came up with a good number of people. And then, of course, it was calling them cold, talking to them, trying to convince them. Some said yes right away, some had no idea why or what, and some said no. Because Sandra and I are both Jewish, we tend to have more Jewish friends than we do others. We realized that we were having a lot of Jewish people in the book, and our goal was really to have Florida represented. And so then we really made a concerted effort. Sandra went to assisted living facilities. She went to Black churches. She went to community centers. She went all over and did everything she could possibly do to find diversity. And so we were much more selective toward the end than we were in the beginning. And it turned out that we really had a nice representation. There were certain areas that we really were hoping we could find people, but for example, we were unable to find any Asians at all, and we really looked hard. We wanted to have Native Americans. We have reservations here in South Florida and all over Florida, really, but we were unable to do that. I feel that we did a good job representing people. One of the things that we were really pleased about is we have people from 20 different countries of origin. That in itself really gives a whole different picture because so many of them, there were some Holocaust survivors. There were lots of people who left Cuba because of Castro, people who left South America, Venezuela, because of what was going on there. It is a nice representation from Florida altogether, actually.
It sounds absolutely amazing, and I feel like the diversity that you brought to the table adds to the richness of an already absolutely exquisitely beautiful book, which I have seen. And I wouldn't mind if you could take a moment to show it to our audience. I mean, it's just beautiful from a graphics point of view, from a portraits point of view, from a quotations. So if you'd like to take a moment to share it and show it to our audience, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So this is the cover. The book weighs 5 pounds, so it's a pretty substantial book. Every person in the book has one page where it tells their story and then has words of wisdom, because that was really our main focus, was to get words of wisdom. Then it has their photograph. So this is George Gibson. George was the first Black officer from the Bahamas, and he worked with Miami-Dade police force. And then each page also, each person also has a quote. So besides all the other quotes, they have one single quote. The book has 90 different portraits. This man he was from Cuba. He came here as an ophthalmologist and originally couldn't practice until he went back to school and got some degrees, but he was great. This is another woman, Dolly. Her husband ended up serving meals to students at University of Miami, and they ended up having 60 different food stores or whatever as a result of that. I mean, the stories were just absolutely incredible.
I'm sure you've heard some absolutely incredible stories throughout this whole process. Were there one or two that stood out in particular for you and left a lasting impression or that touched you in a particular way?
Well, yes, there were more than one or two, but I will share one or two. So one was Enid Pinkney. Enid Pinkney is a Black woman. She lived in South Florida and as a young child experienced a lot of prejudice. You know, in those days they had water fountains that were marked for coloreds only. She really understood prejudice in a very deep way. And she became a social worker and decided to move to Chicago because she said the prejudice was just too much for her. She went to Chicago and she worked with a community of 11 social workers in some kind of community center situation. And they were all white, and one day they went out to lunch and they served all 11 people on plates and they brought Enid's food in a basket. And she said, if that goes on here in Chicago, I might as well go home and be with my family. And she came back to South Florida and she ended up becoming assistant principal in a high school that was just being desegregated. And her job was to basically bring peace to this situation. And it was really hard. She told us that some of the white teachers would ask questions of the students and would not call on the white students who raised their hands, but would call on the Black students who didn't. And she said there was just so much prejudice still at that point. That was at Miami Edison. Enid was instrumental in redeveloping of one of the Green hotels, the Hampton House. Green Hotel was one in which, for example, if African American people would come down to entertain, they couldn't stay in hotels with white people. They would have their own special hotels. They could entertain wherever, but they just had to be segregated. And so she has brought that back to the community in terms of a historical place. She also helped refurbish the Lemon City Cemetery in Miami. Enid recently passed away, but I have to say that of all the interviews that I sat in, I think I was most emotional in that one because just listening to the pain of what she experienced as a young person and then growing up and trying to make a difference. She made a huge difference in our community. And so she was one of the very special people that I interviewed. Another one was Eva Cutler. Eva Cutler was a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. Eva was in Bergen-Belsen. She has this most beautiful attitude about teaching people about peace and love. I happen to know Eva very well. I worked with her when I was at the Holocaust Center. Eva came to the United States and became a fabric artist and created all these beautiful murals and pieces. Plus, she also was a clothing designer. Eva's going to be 100 in April. In the last 5 years, Eva has continued to do her art. So she now paints as well as does fabric projects. 2 years ago in December, she had a single art show with all her work that was just absolutely amazing. So one day, she was really down because she didn't have a project. I was talking to her on the phone and she said, I just need a project. I said, do you want me to give you a project? And she said, yes. So I asked her to do something with a rainbow for me. And she did this most magnificent piece that she gave me. So interviewing Eva while I knew her, and she was one of the few that I knew really well, was such a joy because my focus was very different this time. You know, it was really looking for what words of wisdom do you have that you can share so that others can learn from you. And it was not Holocaust centered, like so often interviews with Holocaust survivors are. It was much more about living life today and what she can teach us.
That sounds amazing. And it sounds like not only were you able to capture sort of a lot of cultural diversity, but also a lot of diversity in sharing powerful life stories, that highlight very specific issues. That's incredible. For the viewers who don't know this, we interviewed Merle about a year ago on another incredible project that she did, which was she published two books on called Living and Leaving My Legacy, which was about leaving legacy. I remember at the time of that interview, you had written, I don't know how many hundreds of journals over the years, and then spent, I think, 10 or 11 years rereading all the journals and going through them. But the thing that stood out to me was that you started to distill the messages that were in them, and that there were a number of threads that kept sort of reappearing over the years and through the journals, and the books were a distilling of those messages at the time. And I wanted to ask you, with wisdom of the century, what were some of the common life lessons that emerged from interviewing all these various individuals?
One of the things that really struck us was how important family is and the messages about family and love. Love was another thing. One of the questions we asked is, how do you define love? And of course, every person has a different definition, but it was so interesting how some were very focused on maybe their husband or wife or the person who they had lived with all their lives or their children, and others were more global, loving in a global way. One of the things they talked about a lot was respect. And what we found was that many of them said that they felt that today's generation didn't have the same kind of respect as the respect that they were taught growing up. And I thought that was pretty interesting. They talked about honesty, how important it is to be honest. I mean, the life lessons that they shared, to be kind when you fail at something, to learn from it, to pick yourself up, wipe yourself off, and learn from your lessons. Several of them had lost children, and they talked about the impact of how that changed their lives. And for some, how they were able to really move on. And a few who really struggled for so long. I mean, the loss of a child is a really tragic thing. And it was interesting to see how they each dealt with that and talked about it.
Circling back for a moment to the question of diversity that you've so successfully infused into the book, the diversity of backgrounds that you share from all the different cultures in the book. You mentioned you had immigrants, Holocaust survivors, war veterans. How did all these different backgrounds help to shape the narrative or the overall narrative of the book?
I think that one of the things that I found was how coming to America changed their lives. So, for example, those who were in the Holocaust, of course, experienced the tragedies of the Holocaust, many of whom lost their entire families, and they were the only survivors. And they came to the United States looking for a new life, and they found it. And so their idea of freedom throughout the book, I would say that that was huge. The respect they have for this country. Some of them are really concerned about politically. Some of them were very tuned into politics and concerned one way or the other. Um, a few of them, who said we left dictators, we don't want a dictator. I mean, it was just really interesting to hear. The people from Cuba, for example, whose lives were totally turned upside down because when Castro came in, leaving their families and coming, some of them who left their children behind and came to find a home to then bring their children. But all across the board, I think that having interviewed people from 20 different countries, I think that the real gift was learning that they all have such love for United States. And that to me said so much. And really the idea of freedom, how important freedom is in our lives. So I think that mixing all the cultures together, I would say if there's one lesson that I think that they above all that stood out that was a common thread would certainly be that.
Diving into it a little bit deeper, some of these nonagenarians and centenarians must have witnessed major historical events. How do they view other changes such as technology, society, culture in general?
One of the things that I was just delighted about was how many of them had iPhones, iPads, communicate with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren that way. So there were some who really have embraced technology in a way that people a lot younger than them have not. I would laugh actually because my husband is someone who just kind of, once the technology really changed, was out of there. He didn't want any part of it. And I would sit with these other people and I'd come home and think, oh my God, he's so much younger. And it's just not happening for him. And I think that that's true in a lot of cases. So that really was amazing to me. There was a man that I interviewed who was 96 who handed me his book that he had just published on humanism. He was in computers all his life. He helped put in computers in one of the banks, one of the big banks, years and years ago. This man started becoming a philosopher. And this is not his first book, but he wrote it at 96. He embraced that. He wasn't finished. We have a man who was the chief rabbi in Argentina, and he does a weekly podcast and puts it out, all kinds of lessons. It's amazing. He's 96 when we interviewed. I think he's probably 90, 99. He's still doing it. Those who are interested really, really embraced it. Many of them, most of them, have really said, I want to continue to be part of this world and to be essential in some way. And so I'm going to keep up with whatever I can.
I absolutely love that idea of embracing change as you move forward. Well, I have a dear friend who's an audiologist at one of the VA hospitals. He deals on a day-to-day basis. He'll see like 8 to 10, 12 patients a day who are, going through the aging process and starting to lose their hearing. And I asked him once, I said, you've seen all these people through the years. And I said, is there something that stands out to you with regard to people who age better than others? And he said, oh my gosh, absolutely, hands down. He explained to me that the ones who embrace change and accept what's happening to them and go with it. So, for example, they might be losing their hearing, but then they'll turn to reading or to gardening or, just adapt with whatever is happening. He says those people age very gracefully and everything seems to thrive. Like they thrive physically, mentally, emotionally, all of that. And he said the ones that resist the changes tend to deteriorate very quickly. And this is not based on science or anything. It was his opinion. I feel like the mental state and the embracing change has such a huge impact on your life in general. So thank you for sharing that.
I want to say something about that. One of the questions I asked is what do you attribute your longevity to? And some of them said genetics, some of them had siblings that lived to be 100, and so was a lot of that. But most of them said diet, exercise, connection to people, really important. And I think that was key. I think that having other people in their lives, having the socialization has made a huge difference. And just being able to have some kind of purpose, to wake up with something, whether it's to go to the gym or to meet someone for lunch, call a grandchild, whatever it is, having that purpose. So I think that those things are really important. And the people we interviewed, for the most part, were so lively and interested in the world and wanting to know what's going on, and being able to talk about the changes and knowing that they've come along with them. And so what you say is so true.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the fortune of having my grandmother around till 103, and exactly how you were saying, she was vibrant and connected and engaged, and people loved spending time with her, and she just had this incredible light and attitude that people were attracted to. It was wonderful. So the next question is really about family and connection that you just touched on. And I wanted to know, what role did family, community, and love play in the lives of the nonagenarians and centenarians according to their stories?
One woman, her name was Tilly. We walked into her house and she's living with her son. She lives with her son half the year here and then half the year up north. She has 5 children, 14 grandchildren, I think 36 or 38 great grandchildren. And what she talked about was how her great grandchildren come over, take her to lunch, take her to get her nails done, spend time with her. They're just so connected. And you could just see when she talked about family, how her whole face lit up. She felt so embraced with love. There were some people who did not have children, who really had their community, the people around them, but to give them important love and feeling of belonging. But I think that above all else, the the people who had the gift of family just realized that nothing was more important than that. And to see how the families were there for them, take care of them and still invite them to holidays and make them a center focus is so important. At our launch, we had the opportunity to meet many of the families of these people. So at the launch, 40 of the people who are in the book came to the launch. And many of them came with their children, a few husbands and wives. We actually had 2 couples who had married over 75 years, which was pretty exciting, and they're both in the book. It was wonderful to see these elderly people with their children who are so proud of them, and to see them taking their children to the room where we have an exhibition of all the photographs at the History of Miami Museum and being so proud. And so the pride of the individuals themselves and then of their families, to see their parents shining in this way was really beautiful. So I would say that it's, makes a huge difference to have family, and if not family, to have people in your life who care about you.
I love hearing that. It's amazing. I find that in a lot of cultures, the elders of a community are very much revered for their wisdom, their intelligence, the way they hold the space for the community. And then in other cultures or communities, they tend to be completely dismissed and sort of put on a side and not taken into consideration. I wanted to hear from you. What do you hope that younger generations will take away from the wisdom shared in this book and in this project?
Our goal is really to pass along words of wisdom. And I'll just give you a few examples of things that happened. So in one case, a woman who I know came to the launch, and 2 days later, I had an open house, and she came and she brought a box of donuts, and she said, "These donuts are from my son, who's 12 years old." She said, "I bought the book at the launch. I came home the next day. I saw him sitting with the book and reading the pages and looking at them. And he said to me, when I told him I was going to your house for an open house, he said, 'I want you to bring her something as a gift from me, because I learned so much from her. So that was one. At this open house, someone brought his 11-year-old son. And here were all these adults, and I see this young kid. So I took him over to the book and I said, let me tell you some stories about these people. So I just kind of turned the pages and just gave him just short tidbits on each person. And as I did that, I watched his eyes get bigger and bigger. So that for me was so important. Just last night, I heard from my nephew, who is 42, I think, who said, I've been sitting and reading. He said, the wisdom in this book is priceless. Another one, 55 years old, also last night wrote me and said, the advice in this book is phenomenal and life-changing. And so what we hope is that anyone who picks up this book will look at, even if it's one piece of knowledge or one way of looking at the world differently, then we will have succeeded in what we set out to do.
How absolutely precious, especially with regard to those the little kids. I think it's amazing. You mentioned, I mean, the book is filled with priceless wisdom that you're sharing with all the various ages, but you've also managed to very successfully blend storytelling with incredible photography. How did you approach all of this, and how did you blend all of this together?
I have to say that this was such a team effort. I've worked with a lot of teams in my life. I've never worked with a team quite like this. Each one of us was fastidious about our own little piece of the project. Pipe is an absolute fabulous photographer. And actually, when I saw the book for the first time, I thought, no one has to read anything. All you have to do is look at these exquisite photos because they just, each one pops out on the page. When it came to the stories, in our interviews, the interviews were like an hour, 2 hours long. There's a lot of material. And so basically my job was to synthesize that material and pick out the points that I thought would be most relevant or people would be interested in the stories. But as a team, once I wrote the stories, we all shared them. I shared them with everyone. And then, for example, Sandra would send me the transcription of the Spanish interview, and then I would pull from that. She would say to me, in that interview, Merle, it didn't come across this way, but what was really important, what this person stressed was this. And so then I would go back and add that to the interview. So it was really a team effort. And then Jenny, who's a graphic designer, I mean, the beauty of this book, besides the photography, is Jenny's work of just formatting this book in such a beautiful way. But everything that we did as a team. And if there was ever any discussion, one person felt one way and another person felt another way, what we always ended up doing was deferring to the person who had the expertise. It was like when we couldn't really decide, we'd say, okay, then you decide, this is yours. And for me, having the opportunity to work with people like this, and honestly, I mean, I'm much closer to the age of the people that I interviewed than I am to the people in the team. And so for me, it was also very interesting to see what they were getting. For example, when they heard these words of wisdom, there were some that they probably had never thought about before. I can honestly say there's very little that I hadn't heard or thought of, really. But what I got from this was what's possible. So I just turned 80. I left each one saying, you know what? I still got a lot to do. There's still a lot more of life to lead. So there's something for everyone in this book. And I think part of all of this is the way the book is so beautiful, I think, is a reflection of the fact that we just together did this.
Yeah, and a happy birthday to you. It's
Thank
incredible. And what a powerful learning experience for the whole team across the board from so many angles. I think it's fantastic. Now, I know as a team, you've managed to put together this amazing book, and that you've done a book launch, a number of interviews, and there's still more to go even after this one. I wanted to know, how has the community in general responded to Wisdom of the Centuries, and have there been any surprises for you?
One of the things we did is we created an exhibition. When we went to the History Miami Museum, we went into a room that was an exhibition room, and Sandra and I looked at each other and said, "Oh, well, that might be possible." So we created this exhibition, which is all the pictures of all 90 people, and also a video of behind the scenes. When we were interviewing them, it's a 17-minute video. One of the things that's happened is we've gotten great response from people who have seen the exhibit, and we're now talking about taking the exhibit elsewhere in Florida, which is pretty exciting. How I really knew that this book was going to be successful was at our launch. So we launched on December 12th, and we initially thought maybe we would have 150 people. We ended up with 400 people. And you could just see there was so much love and excitement. There were no surprises except just such gratification, knowing that we had done this. And above all else, the idea that we have honored these 90 people and that they now realize that they have not only a picture in the book, but they have their story. So their legacy, in some way, their words of wisdom are going to be passed down to this and future generations, which is what we want. The only surprise is that we did it, that we actually accomplished this, and really had no idea that it would ever be what it's turned out to be.
It's an absolutely remarkable achievement and accomplishment. And speaking of that, I remember in our last interview around leaving your legacy, the two books that you published, those were already, in my opinion, remarkable projects and endeavors to undertake that took years. And at the time, I remember asking, are there any other projects in the pipeline? And you sort of left it as a maybe or an open question mark. And then here you are. I don't even think it's a year later with this incredible book that's, been put together masterfully and published. And it's incredible. I mean, you're absolutely unstoppable and it's so inspiring. And so I wanted to ask you the same question again. Are there any future projects that you're looking at?
We have talked about doing something else because we worked so well together and we all kind of fell in love with each other. And so we would like to do something. We've thrown around some ideas, and right now we're still kind of in the glow of the book, so we haven't gone further. I don't know whether we will. I personally have a project that I have begun. Um, it's funny because I realize what a driven soul I am, that I always have to have something. So I had a friendship with a man for 40 years that I had met at the beach. Tom had been a former priest. He ended up at some point in his life becoming the ABC bureau chief of the UN. And Tom and I wrote letters. He lived in New York for most of his life. We had always talked about the beauty of our friendship and wanted to share it. And so we used to talk for years about writing our story. And I had started 2 times before, and both times was so overwhelmed I didn't even know. I have hundreds of letters. When I started my journal project, I have a whole section on Tom that I didn't use that's like 382 single space pages. And I have our emails and I have our texts. So I have like a massive amount of information. Tom died 2 years ago, October. And so I decided, well, then I'm going to do the book then. And I started, and it was way too soon. I was not ready. But about a month or two ago, I started thinking, Wisdom of the Century is winding down, and maybe this is the time. And now I'm 80, and who knows how long I have to live. And if I'm going to do it, this is the time. So I have begun that project. And I don't know what it's going to look like. I just know that right now I have to read the letters, put them in the computer, and make a decision when it comes. I'm just going to leave it open. I've never actually started a project with such an unknown. I mean, when we did the Wisdom Project, it was not me alone. So I was not certainly was not my vision. It was Sandra's vision. And so now I am moving on to the next one.
Mhm. Sounds like it's going to be a special honoring of a dear friend and a special relationship. I look forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Merle, what is your overarching message to the world?
To love one another. Just our world has so many problems, and I just think it's so important to give ourselves positive messages and love, and to be able to respect one another, regardless of our diversities, and just be kind. Be kind.
Mhm. That's beautiful. Thank you. Merle, and I wanted to, as always, take a moment to acknowledge you and the person that you are in the world and to those around you and the powerful force that you are. There have been a couple of threads of life lessons that you've touched upon during this interview. And I feel like they relate so closely to you and to who you are as a person. I see you just being an incredible pillar of strength and inspiration in your family. It feels like you even extended family to me. As far as love and respect go, you absolutely embody those, kindness too. And failure, I mean, it seems like any stumbling blocks, you seem to just take them in your stride and keep going. I'm absolutely inspired by the way that you embrace change and your light and your enthusiasm, and you're just being unstoppable.
Thank you. It is a privilege, really, Gaia, to know you and to have you do this. I appreciate it, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
You are most welcome. And it's been a pleasure as always. And for those of you who have been following along and watching the interview, please feel free to comment, like, share. If you have questions for Merle, please put them in the comments below. She'd be glad to answer them. And also, we'll be putting links to the Wisdom of the Century book and website. If you'd like to purchase it or learn more about it, please do. Thank you again for watching.